Once upon a time, there was a little girl, the prettiest you have ever seen. Her mother and her grandmother loved her very much. They called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother told her, "Your grandmother is sick. Go and see how she is, so that you can bring her some cookies and those homemade jars of jelly." Little Red Riding Hood went to visit her grandmother right away. When she was walking into the forest, she met a wolf. The wolf wanted to gobble her up on the spot, but he worried the woodcutter nearby would hear. He pretended to be a very kind and gentle wolf and asked her where was she going. She said, "I am going to see my grandmother, to take her some cookies and a jar of jelly." "Does she live very far away?" asked the wolf. "Oh, yes," replied Little Red Riding Hood. "Her house is the first house in the village." "Well," said the wolf, "I would like to see her too. We can talk about different roads, and we can see who arrives first." The wolf chose the shortest path, running as fast as he could, while the little girl went by the other long path, amusing herself with butterflies and picking small pretty flowers. The wolf reached the grandmother's house in just a short time. He knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who is it?" came a voice from inside. "It's your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "I have brought you some cookies and a jar of jelly." The good grandmother, who was in bed, called out, "Come in, my dearest girl." The wolf lifted the latch and the door opened. He jumped on the bed and ate up the poor grandmother in less than a second. Then he shut the door and lay down in the bed to wait for Little Red Riding Hood. A few moments later, Little Red Riding Hood knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who is it?" came the gruff wolf voice. "Is that my grandmother's voice?" Little Red Riding Hood was scared at first, but she thought my grandmother was ill and answered, "It's your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood. I have brought you some cookies and a jar of jelly." The wolf softened his voice and said, "Come in." Little Red Riding Hood opened the door and came in. The wolf hid under the bed, covered with a quilt, and said, "Put the cookies and the jelly on the table and come sit beside me." Little Red Riding Hood walked to the bed and stared at her grandmother. "Grandma, what big arms you have!" she cried. "All the better to hug you with," the wolf answered. "And grandmother, what big ears you have!" "Then I can hear you better." "Grandma, what big eyes you have!" "Then I can see you better." Grandma, what big teeth you have! Cried the little Red Riding Hood. Big enough to eat you, barked the wolf, and throwing back the covers, he leapt out of bed, just as he was about to eat up the little girl. The woodcutter, who was nearby, used his axe, cut off the wolf's head, and nobody was ever troubled again.